Welcome to Berlin, and of course, good morning and welcome to the Crop Diversity Summit 2023. It's great to see you all. It's great to see you all in the internet. Thanks for joining us from wherever you are joining us today. And thanks, of course, to you, ladies and gentlemen, from all around the world. We do have, of course, an international audience today. And welcome again to the Global Crop Diversity Summit. Dear participants, dear politicians, dear thinkers, thought leaders, dear activists, dear change makers for a global crop diversity, I call you all out. It's great to see your face. This is your crop summit today. Thanks for being here today. Yes, that was right. We need to warm up a little bit, I know, but we do have enough coffee for the day for you, so we are all prepped and equipped. No worries about that. Without further ado, my name is Gallus. I'm very excited to be your host of today. I'm coming from a farming family, so, you know, all the topics that we're going to discuss today comes also from my deepest passion and my heart, and I'm very much looking forward also to your questions. We do have some Slido activity coming up. I'm going to explore that with you in a second. But without further ado, I welcome on stage the chairs of our summit, Catherine Bertini. We excuse her because she's not feeling well today. So whenever you're watching us, get better soon. Greetings from Berlin. But here on stage, I welcome now Yasmina Bahloul, the chair of Plant Treaty Governing Body, and Joachim von Braun, the president of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. The stage is all yours. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Gallus. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. The genius loci, the image of this place is it's a church, but it is not a church. We are religious about crop diversity. That brings us together. And it's a very high tower. From there you have vision of what needs to change and in the field of sustainable food systems. I welcome you on behalf of the board of the Crop Diversity Trust. This board is very diverse, an international group that governs the Crop Trust. I'm very pleased to remind us that this meeting is under the patronage of the German federal president, Mr. Steinmeier. This summit is a summit for a purpose. It has a clear message. Crop diversity is essential for survival and for healthy food systems. It is essential in the environmentally more risky and vulnerable world. Secondly, the meaningful use of this crop diversity requires global cooperation not only among gene banks, but also with scientists, especially the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, cooperation with agricultural innovators and farmers. The Crop Diversity Trust fosters this cooperation. And third, the task of this summit is to pay attention to sufficient funding and lack of funding. Funding for gene banks and for the innovation investments around it. That sufficient funding is currently not the case. The opportunities of the investment in the Crop Diversity Trust relate to coping with climate change, sustainable land use, and food security. We must fend off the risks the natural hazards, the political risks which gene banks and crop diversity are exposed to. We look forward to your contributions to strengthen the needed cooperation and the sense of urgency to move forward with a better protected, better utilized crop diversity. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to be here today for the first ever Global Crop Diversity Summit, which comes at a time when we must urgently discuss and find solutions to ensure the future of the world's plant biodiversity for sustainable food and nutrition security. There are new developments on many fronts of relevance to the plant genetic resources world that we should connect and build on in our collective work. United Nations fora have recently taken important decisions on biodiversity protection and on benefit sharing. Arising from the use of genetic resources and digital sequence information, DCI, on genetic resources. The outcomes of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, COP15 of the Convention of Biodiversity, CBD, in particular, the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has transformed the global biodiversity policy landscape and others new opportunities of the plant genetic resources for food and agriculture community that we must consider strategically and position ourselves and as leaders within. Today is an opportunity to do this. This summit is also timely as next week the 10th session of the treaty's governing body is taking place in Rome, Italy, where approximately 600 participants representing governments, international organizations, international agricultural research centers, farmers' organizations, civil society, and the private sector will meet to discuss and negotiate global policy issues of relevance to the world's crop diversity. The discussions and outcomes of this summit will be conveyed at the governing body at its opening ceremony next week in a summary that my fellow co-chair and I will develop through this meeting. In line with the ambitions of the summit, the theme of the GB10 is From Seeds to Innovative Solutions, Safeguarding Our Future, contributing to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework for Sustainable Food Systems. Both are aiming to shine a light on the role that plant diversity and the global PGRFA community can play in contributing to global policy goals that ensures plant biodiversity is safeguarded for future generations. The Crop Trust and the treaty have a long history of collaboration and cooperation, and I thank them for this opportunity to come together today on this important initiative. I encourage us all to use this opportunity to join forces across the many different parts of the agri-food system that we represent and strategize on the collective action we can take as a community to increase political awareness and the much-needed funding for plant genetic resources. I wish you a fruitful summit, and I look forward to coming together again at the end of this day to reflect the discussions of today and to identify a pathway forward after this meeting to maximize the opportunities and momentum rising from the new policy landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yasmina and Joachim. And I'm going to see you, of course, later for the wrap-up again when we reflect on what we discovered today. So before we dive into our day, just a few more sentences about the Crop Trust and the International Plant Treaty. As some of you or many of you know, the Crop Trust is an international organization working really to preserve crop diversity and protect global food and nutrition security. And at the core of the Crop Trust, there is this fund dedicated to providing guaranteed financial support to seed banks worldwide. One of the famous seed bank is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And the Crop Trust also coordinates large-scale projects worldwide that we can also see, of course, in the posters around us. The International Plant Treaty, or also called the Seed Treaty, as it's sometimes known, aims to improve global food security by making it very easy or easier for scientists and farmers to obtain and use seeds and other plant materials for crop improvement. Just a few more sentences on that. So we do have a lot of guests. Let's get started into our day, right? And I welcome now digitally the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development of Colombia, Jhénifer Mojica Flórez. She sent us a video message.
Mi nombre es Jhénifer Mojica, ministra de Agricultura y Desarrollo Rural de Colombia. Desde este país tropical mando un saludo muy especial y fraterno a mis colegas en la Cumbre Mundial para la Diversificación de Cultivos. Desde Colombia, desde la apuesta que estamos haciendo en el gobierno del presidente Gustavo Petro de lograr que Colombia sea una potencia de la vida y siendo conscientes que compartimos este gran ecosistema esencial para la reversión de los efectos de la crisis climática que es la Amazonía, en donde la mitad de nuestro territorio está inserto en este bioma y en donde además también compartimos el bioma del Chocó biogeográfico en nuestra costa pacífica, queremos decirles que la gran apuesta en la que tenemos que unir nuestros lazos mundiales para sobrevivir a este enorme reto que tenemos de dar pasos atrás en la generación de gases con efecto invernadero, este gran reto que tenemos desde el sector de agricultura y forestales como los grandes aportantes también a esta crisis ambiental y en el reto que tenemos de abastecer de alimentos a esta gran humanidad en la que tenemos un desafío conjunto de permitir la producción de alimentos cada vez más limpia, más orgánica y más acorde al aprovechamiento adecuado y sostenible de los recursos naturales. La única alternativa es poder hacer un énfasis en estas prácticas de producción tradicionales de la agricultura familiar que hacen los campesinos, los pueblos indígenas tradicionales y ancestrales, los pueblos negros que compartimos también en esta diversidad cultural en nuestro país. Volver a ver con ojos de prioridad a esas prácticas, a esas semillas, a esas culturas que aprovechan los recursos del ambiente, pero no de manera intensiva, sino de manera armónica con la naturaleza. Poder volver a invertir en bioinsumos que ayuden a sustituir esa gran dependencia en los agroinsumos, fertilizantes e insecticidas de base química que degradan el suelo, contaminan las fuentes del agua, generan desertificación y generan unos daños irreparables. Tenemos que volver atrás, tenemos que volver a eso que es tradicional, tenemos que volver a la cultura y a la gastronomía y al estímulo de la agrobiodiversidad. Nosotros tenemos apuestas en, primero, proteger los territorios de estas comunidades y asegurar que puedan desempeñar en ellos sus prácticas agroecológicas y sus semillas nativas. Segundo, poder estimular la generación de sustitutos a los insumos agropecuarios de bases químicas que degradan y que contaminan. Para ello tenemos muchas alternativas que la ciencia y la innovación han valorado en lo que es la generación de insumos a partir de insumos biológicos que puedan ser cada vez más sostenibles y que bajen esa dependencia universal que tenemos a los insumos de base química. Tercero, tenemos una gran apuesta por hacer actividades de agroecología, es decir, prácticas que el campesino a campesino ha venido diseñando y gestando y que ha mostrado en el mundo que pueden alimentar al planeta. Cuarto, en generar actividades de reconversión productiva hacia prácticas que sean agricultura baja en carbono, arreglos en cultivos agrícolas, como arreglos en producciones pecuarias que permitan generar comida a la vez que estoy aportando a todo este desarrollo forestal y medioambiental y proteccionista del medio ambiente. Y quinto, una apuesta en donde también desde el sector de la agricultura seamos el sector de la transición hacia la protección y el ordenamiento territorial que proteja y dé prioridad a las fuentes de agua, a los ecosistemas estratégicos, a la biodiversidad. Les mando un abrazo fraterno, sé que van a ser muy grandes las apuestas, sé que son mucho más fuertes los lazos que nos unen y sé que conjuntamente, aportando nuestra capacidad en ciencia, innovación, tecnología, extensión, enlazamientos para afrontar los riesgos fitosanitarios que cada vez son peores debido a la crisis ambiental, a los ciclos de sequías e inundaciones, entre todos vamos a sacar adelante y vamos a poder lograr nuestras metas frente al cambio climático.
Colombia, potencia de la vida.
You know why I love my job? Because I can watch you when you don't think that I'm watching. And just watching this movie and these images of coffee and corn and farmers and all the farming practices, I saw so many smiles on your face. I'm your mirror, so I just, you know, that's you. That's you sharing the love also for agriculture and crop diversity. I just wanted to share that with you because I thought, that's a lovely image, not just the images that we just saw in the movie, but also, of course, your faces when we think about agriculture and when we think about crop diversity and talk about it, of course. All right, I already mentioned that I have a few surprises for you. A QR code, not just one QR code, I have 3 QR codes for you. Just to run you through the day, on the back side of your name badge, you will find the first QR code. That is our itinerary for today with the updated program. Wherever there's a change, you will find all the updates on that QR code, close to your heart, of course. That's number 1. Number 2 is on the back of the chair. So you will see several QR codes on that little piece of paper. On the left side, that is the QR code for you designed asking questions during our panels. And yeah, as I mentioned, I'm very much looking forward also to your questions. So that's the left QR code. And on the right, there's another QR code. That is for our Twitter wall. Because, of course, we do have the hashtag Seeds2Solutions. So you will find all the social channels, all the socials on the right QR code. And please, of course, tag us. Please use the hashtag Seeds2Solution. No questions on that right QR code. I repeat, no questions on that right QR code because I cannot check LinkedIn, social, TikTok, YouTube, your Facebook channels along the way. I will only do Slido later, just that we are clear here on that. But you will see all your selfies, maybe also with the pumpkins later on. A pumpkin is a good keyword because, of course, we do have pumpkins along the way. They're not just here for decoration. They are also here for you to take with you back home. If you are, keen to have a selfie with a pumpkin, put it up on your Twitter wall, or if you want to bring home something sustainable, then of course use the pumpkin, and you have pumpkin soup all week. Good. Thank you very much for that clarification. 3 different QR codes, and we're very much looking forward to your questions. So coming into our first thematic block, and you all know the topic, it's the maltreated planet, the title, Malnourished People, the urgent need for a transformation of our agri-food systems. So what effect do current agri-food systems have on humanity and, of course, on the world? And can we do better? And if so, how? And that's the big, big keyword, transformation and change. Transformation is necessary, as we all know, before more lives are marred by malnutrition or lost to hunger. Before, and we are heading to the COP28 in Dubai, before the climate reaches the tipping points, before more ecosystems are destroyed and species become extinct. So hard and tough topics, but this is our topic of the hour, and as you all know, a lot of people are part of our summit, and we start, of course, now officially with our conference with welcoming words by the President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, Alvaro Lario.
Honorable ministers, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I regret that I cannot be with you in person today. However, I'm honored to share my thoughts on the need for a radical transformation of our food systems. Our food systems are damaging both our planet and its people. They are responsible for 80% of global deforestation, contribute to 20 to 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and consume 75% of the world's freshwater resources. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Excessive use of pesticides and chemicals are destroying ecosystems and biodiversity. They are posing a threat to human health, and all of this without resolving the issue of food insecurity. In 2022, a staggering 900 million people worldwide still suffered from extreme food insecurity. The numbers are clear, yet there is hope. Small-scale farms harbor greater biodiversity than larger farms. Agroecological approaches like crop rotation, organic farming, and agroforestry improve nutrition while safeguarding ecosystems. Food systems also play a vital role in creating jobs, providing livelihoods for over 1 billion people, primarily in rural areas. If we want to achieve a sustainable transformation, we must factor in biodiversity, climate, and food security. Resilience and inclusivity should be also central, particularly amid growing crises. How do we make this transformation sustainable and inclusive? We need to invest in those who hold the key to change, rural people. We have not yet invested in rural people at the scale and the speed that is needed. Food systems in general receive just 3% of public climate finance, while small-scale farmers are stuck at 1.7%. This is inadequate. Since the year 1978, IFAD has invested over $24 billion in rural communities and food systems. We are now scaling up our investments. We are ensuring that all of our initiatives are climate adapted, with 60% being nutrition sensitive. The transformation we're working towards demands not just financing, but also stronger partnerships across both the public and private sectors. Among others, we work closely with FAO on the food systems integrated approach, and along with the World Bank, IFAD is leading the food systems financing agenda. In the upcoming IFAD 13th replenishment, we're seeking to a greater participation, especially from the private sector. I am confident that this engaging crop genetics summit will provide a platform for innovative solutions and proposals. I look forward to collaborating so we can turn these transformations into reality. Thank you all, and I wish you a very highly productive summit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvaro Lario, for joining us and for sending us, of course, this important message. Now with us, I warmly welcome Germany's Federal Minister for Agriculture and Food. With us is for his keynote, Özdemir. Great to have you. Hi.
Thank you, Kati Gallus. Mr. von Braun, Mrs. Bahloul, Mrs. Sandkjar, and Wenke Westberg, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you for your invitation, and let me start up with a question. Do you know what Cavaglia is? I assume some of you might do. I have to admit, until recently, I did not know anything about it. To me, as a so-called Anatolian Swabian, for those of you who are not familiar with that expression, Anatolia is the country of my forefathers, Turkey, where they came from as so-called guest workers, and Swabia is the region where I grew up in Germany. I have to admit, this is a bit embarrassing. I also did not know about the connection between this type of wheat and a certain Swabian plant. Kavalya is a wheat variety that characterized Eastern Anatolian landscapes for more than 400 generations. That is over 10,000 years. This wheat variety used to make entire regions appear honey yellow. It was one of the first plants to be cultivated by humans. It was adapted to growing under rough, moist conditions at great altitudes, and it fed humans. These days, it is one of the rarest plants in its native country. It can be found on few fields cultivated by a small number of farmers. The plant is at risk of extinction. For a long time, the same applied to the old Swabian lentil variety, Alpläuse, as we pronounce it, from my own home region. Over 60 years ago, the last lentil farmer in the Swabian Jura stopped cultivating this variety. Lentil cultivation, along with the old native varieties, was lost. This meant the disappearance of a food plant that had been cultivated in the Swabian Jura for more than 2 millennia. And this happened despite the fact that these Jura lentils are rich in protein and minerals, especially in poorer regions. And the Swabian Jura was a very poor region for a very long time. The people could not afford animal protein in the form of meat. They compensated this through protein from lentils. But then the Swabian lentils suddenly disappeared completely from the Jura. Other, easier to handle plants were cultivated instead. But two plants I mentioned are not only connected by the common fate and my personal background. They are also part of today's discussion topic, a topic that can be outlined by two fascinating questions which British author Dan Saladino quite rightly posed in his book, Eating to Extinction. I quote, "How can it be that we have some varieties of a plant species that are on the brink of extinction, while at the same time other varieties are cultivated virtually everywhere? Why have we sacrificed so much to uniformity instead of also protecting the special properties of many plants that could make a real contribution to the fight against the climate crisis, plant diseases, and resistances?" Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, as usual, the answers to these questions are, of course, multidimensional. The development of new and productive varieties, especially during the decades after the Second World War, was necessary to feed people around our globe. The origins of the European Common Agricultural Policy were based on the intention of providing people with sufficient food. Thus, thousands of traditional varieties were replaced by a small number of new, more productive varieties. A highly productive agricultural sector was since developed that has fed increasing numbers of people. However, in doing so, agriculture has become more and more dependent on external factors such as pesticides and fertilizers and high water consumption. This led to a tripling of cereal production over the past century. This productivity increase improved the food security of a growing world population, which more than had doubled between 1970 and 2020. What was overlooked in favor of productivity for a long time, however, was the danger that the uniformity of homogeneous crops pose. The negative effects of large agricultural parcels and the associated risks such as diseases, biodiversity loss, and the species extinction were also ignored for a long time. A global food system that thus depends on a limited number of plants is at greater risk of falling victim to disease, pests, and climate extremes. The fact that we have come together here today, however, shows that we have begun to recognize our mistakes in the past. We speak with increasing volume and intensity of the loss of biodiversity and its consequences. And we understand increasingly well how closely the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity are intertwined and how strongly they mutually exacerbate each other. Crop varieties as genetic resources are just as such the foundation of our livelihoods as biodiversity. They are the prerequisite for breeding and innovation, and therefore sustainable agriculture. They are the bedrock of rich harvests in 10, 20, or 50 years' time. And they are therefore the foundation of a diverse and healthy diet. We, as the German federal government, therefore view this conversation and the promotion of genetic resources as well as their sustainable use as one of our core responsibilities. Large diversity will not only make these systems more resilient, diversity is also associated with a larger gene pool, which may yet hide properties that might become useful to us maybe in the future. For us, this means that we have to actively keep as many varieties in use as possible. And varieties that are not actively used must be secured in other ways, for example, in gene banks. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is therefore an invaluable treasure that we created together and put into operation 15 years ago. State Secretary Sandkjær, I would like to express my deepest thanks to Norway for providing the international community with this opportunity. The vault serves to conserve and protect a multitude of seeds for foodstuffs that are crucial to our diets. This diversity is necessary in order to breed new varieties that are adapted to climate change or to draw old varieties. And it is good to know that in case of emergency, we can resort to this diversity. Preserving the diversity in gene banks will therefore also be an important cornerstone in the German genetic resources strategy. Through this strategy, which we plan to present in 2024, we want to bring the importance of genetic resources into the political focus. The strategy is set to highlight genetic resources as part of biodiversity conservation and as a basis for securing our food supply, as well as emphasize their potential for adaptation to the climate crisis. In concrete terms, it will outline what still needs to be done in Germany in order to conserve and use the multitude of genetic resources in agriculture, forestry, and fisheries in a future-proof and in a sustainable way. And of course, international collaboration is another crucial component to this, be it within the scope of the International Seed Treaty or within the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, to conclude, I would like to return to the Eastern Anatolian Cavalia wheat and, of course, my Swabian lentils. Luckily, both plants have been cultivated on more fields during the past few years, and extinction has been averted. This old wheat has once more become a source of income and therefore livelihoods for Anatolian families in rural areas. At the same time, it makes an important contribution to boosting biodiversity in its region of origin. Swabian lentils have again been cultivated mainly according to organic principles since 2001. The variety once more contributes to biodiversity and regional value creation in Swabian Jura. Let us make these two examples as encouragement that it does make a difference whether we act or whether we silently accept a certain development. It is, after all, a positive signal confirming that we can shape change through our own behavior. Let us continue to collaborate closely on the protection of genetic resources. After all, this means protecting the things that may be of huge benefit to us in the future. Thank you very much.
Ciao, thank you. Thank you, dear Minister. And as Swabians, we are, of course, connected because I'm from the same area of Germany, raining from a Swabian farm, as I mentioned. Thank you very much for your visit, dear Minister. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us. All right. Another thing that makes me happy, not just seeing your smiles on your face, but also, of course, having different generations on the stage. Sometimes we tend to debate within our silos, right? Yes, I see you nodding. Great. So it's therefore a great pleasure to welcome now on the stage a very passionate young activist. She is the Global Youth Campaigns Coordinator for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. She founded Act for Food, a global youth-led campaign which aims to transform, of course, our food systems. And this campaign has been mentioned on Forbes magazine and is being implemented globally. Today, she is with us, and what an honor to have you on stage. With us is Sophie Healy-Thow. Sophie, where are you? There you are.
Thank you.
No worries, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Guten Morgen. Ich habe ein bisschen Deutsch, aber mein Deutsch ist nicht so good, so I will spare the beautiful German speakers my horrible German. But dear guests, researchers, and advocates for a more sustainable future, thank you so much for having me here today. I want to make sure you know that I'm not just speaking on behalf of myself here, because that's a hard thing to do, but also I was hoping there'd be a picture of the group that I work with. Oh, there they are. A group of over 30 young people leading Act for Food and over 400 volunteers of Act for Food worldwide. But my name is Sophie Healy-Thow, and 10 years ago my journey in food began, and it began with seeds. I had big plans as a 16-year-old. I wanted to make seeds germinate faster. I wanted them to grow longer. I wanted them to grow heavier. I wanted to help in food systems transformation, but that was a tall order. In school, I was taught about the germination of seeds in biology, and in home economics, I was taught about how to cook a lasagna, but I was never taught about how recipes and biology were interconnected. I was never taught about how important food systems transformation was. I was never taught about climate change and what we can do to mitigate climate change. At home, my sister and I picked apples with our gran in her garden, and she told us about a life that seemed really, really beyond our life today. She told us about how she used to forage for her meals every day. She told us about how she knew every single plant on the small island she grew up on the southwest coast of Ireland. She told me how she used to pick periwinkles off the rocks on the shore, and she told me about how they used to harvest seaweed and eat it later on in the season, something that seemed so far beyond my life that I knew in Ireland. But fast forward to my big plans to create seeds that germinated faster. Myself and others started to do our own research, and we found out that crop diversity was actually really, really important to our everyday lives. We started to do our DIY experiments in a spare room in one of our houses, and we brought this science project in part for a few days off school in the year, but really because we were really, really interested in the germination of crops. We brought this science experiment to our national competition in Dublin, then we went to the EU contest in Prague, and then we went to the Google Science Fair. And it was at the Google Science Fair that there was a day when other students would come in and talk to us about our projects. And it was here that I was met with blank faces. When I explained crop diversity, blank faces. When I explained about the importance of crop diversity, food, nutrition, climate change, and biodiversity, blank faces. Nobody knew what I was talking about, but why would they? We're not taught about it in schools. It's not a conversation had at home. It's not a conversation that we have with our friends, but it's central to our very existence and the very existence of our planet. Crop diversity was, and I still believe is, the silent hero of our agri-food systems. In 2021, I founded Act for Food with 8 other young people, a youth-led movement to transform food systems. We held consultations with over 100,000 young people to really find out what young people were prioritizing when it came to activism in the food sector. And you can imagine, with over 100,000 young people's answers in these consultations, it was very broad. But the one thing that we could find when we asked young people if they had a decision maker sitting in front of them, what would they want them to do to transform food systems? And equally importantly, what can you commit to doing yourself as a young person? The top 3 goals were the same, no matter what country our young people were in, whether they were in Ireland, the UK, Fiji, Pakistan, India, Zimbabwe, Kenya, they were always the same. That was 1, everyone should be able to afford healthy and nutritious food. 2, back sustainable farming to regenerate our soils and reduce damaging chemicals. And 3, every child should eat a healthy and sustainable meal at school, college, or nursery. But not in any of the 100,000 results we got did anybody mention crop diversity. And yet, it remains central to all the goals listed in our consultations. Crop diversity is the bedrock upon which we build resilience and sustainability and equity. However, this diversity is under threat. We witness today a dwindling diversity in our diets, with fewer choices gracing our tables. Growing up with fewer and fewer choices, the next generations face the risk of losing cultural and food heritage and identities and the nutritional elements that sustain us, if they haven't already. As said in Futurama, but there is one hope, and it is Norwegian, the Global Seed Vault. My first knowledge of the Global Seed Vault came from pop culture, and it's a Futurama episode if nobody knows it. It was their futuristic world in which they couldn't find pine trees anymore, so they had to go to the Global Seed Vault to get a pine tree so that they could have their Christmas. And a lot of people my age, their knowledge on the Global Seed Vault does come from pop culture, or it comes from videos calling the Global Seed Vault a doomsday vault. But what they don't realize is that it is really a symbol of international cooperation. It's a shared responsibility, an endeavor that should spark the interest and the excitement of young people today, not just something that they find in pop culture. To truly address the interconnected crisis of food and nutrition, insecurity, climate change, and biodiversity loss, we must transform our agri-food systems. Seed banks play a crucial role in this transformation, safeguarding crop diversity and making it accessible to researchers, plant breeders, and farmers alike. However, for them to fulfill this vital role, they must be empowered, supported, and prioritized in our global agenda. As we delve into the urgent need for a transformation of our agri-food systems, we recognize the profound impact of these systems on humanity and on our planet. The crises we face demand action that goes beyond rhetoric and actually delves into tangible solutions. How can we ensure that everyone has enough nutritious food to eat? It's a question that requires a collective, joined-up approach. Young people must not just be the beneficiaries of programs and policies, they must be the co-creators of these programs and policies. And by doing so, we can ensure that our efforts are sustainable and resonate with the needs of those who inherit the consequences of our actions. Sustainability in food production is paramount. Increasing crop diversity is not just an ecological necessity, it is a strategic move to mitigate the effects of climate shocks on food access and availability. And I think about all my young people right now who are the victims of of wars and conflicts where food is used as a weapon of war when I say this. Moreover, our focus must extend beyond the 1,000 days of life. It must encompass the entire journey of a young person, ensuring health and nutrition are prioritized throughout. In conclusion, let us commit ourselves to protecting crop diversity for future generations. Let us celebrate the richness of our cultural heritage, embrace the potential of seed banks around the world, including the Global Seed Vault, and work collaboratively to transform our agri-food systems. Only through such collective efforts can we hope to secure a future where no one goes hungry, where our plates are adorned with the diversity that sustains us, and where the legacy of our agricultural traditions flourishes for generations to come. Thank you.
Let's sit down, Sophie. No, you go into the spotlight. You go. I'm just decoration. Sophie, I have the question of the room. Where can we watch Futurama? We have boomers around us. I'm millennial, you Gen Z. Where do we find it?
Oh, you can find that episode on YouTube, probably.
Okay,
Anywhere.
great. So that is for all the questions to rewatch it. Thank you. You mentioned, of course, how engaged you are with a lot of young people. And when we look into our newsfeed, a lot of people are engaged with climate action and fighting for climate action. Crop diversity and nutrition and good nutrition is not always on the posters.
Yeah.
So how do we bridge these two topics into a global youth movement? And also, how do you bridge your topic into the youth movement for climate action?
Yeah, well, it's been a really difficult thing to do because I think even sometimes within food, we work a little bit in silos. And even in youth groups, we often can work in silos because we're either climate activists or we're food activists or we're nutrition activists. And last year at COP, there was the first ever food systems pavilion. And this year at COP, there will be a food systems pavilion as well. And within this pavilion, there's youth co-hosts. So there are about 8 youth organizations, youth-led organizations that are co-hosting the pavilion this year. And they include climate activists, they include agriculturalists, scientists, young researchers, and even some artists, which is really exciting. So we're trying to bridge it in that way. But I think, especially when it comes to researchers, we need to pop that bubble a little bit that we often exist in to really speak beyond to new audiences, especially young people.
How do you do that? How do you get out of the silos? I mean, that being at the COP is one thing, but also that's, of course, another bubble.
Yeah.
So, bring it into the broader audience. So what would help, or what is helping your movement to really get into the wider audiences?
Yeah, so recently we worked with the Lancet Commission on their adolescent nutrition paper, and what they did was they brought young people in to help digest and change the paper into something more digestible for young people. So there is the actual paper, and then there's a paper that makes a little bit more sense for a young person, that's in more digestible language. There's videos that come with that paper, and that's something that other areas and other sectors, I think, can do to really bring young people in to understand the topic better.
To understand the topic is one thing, but also to be structured and to organize yourself in a way as well.
Yeah.
It is something different as a youth movement group. I can imagine it's not very formally structured.
No.
And, not a big chart of who's doing what. So how do you organize your group and your movement, or, to break it down, and how many WhatsApp chats and signal groups are you participating and WhatsApping around to somehow organize, of course, the whole movement?
Yeah, it's a chaotic structure, I think. We have I think I'm part of about 30 different WhatsApp groups that talk about policy, communication, what's our narrative, what's our strategy, and then how do we link everything together. I work with 30 young people who are the leaders of the campaign, but we have over 400 volunteers in countries. And what's great about our 30 is that we're global, but what's more important is our country implementation. Because we can talk about whatever we want at a global scale, but if young people aren't part of the implementation processes in countries, then we have a big problem. So in countries, we really try and position our young people as part of national delegations. We have some young MPs as well who are part of proper parliamentarian processes to really position young people not just at the table, but at a level playing field with decision makers in their countries.
Thank you so much. What's the next big step? Just in a nutshell, what's coming up next?
Well, we're trying to work on national pathways coming out of the UN Food Systems Summit to incorporate young people in the implementation processes of those pathways in terms of valuing local and indigenous food practices and knowledge, increasing crop diversity, including climate action-based approaches to food systems transformation, and really trying to ensure that young people are part of those processes.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing the stage with us today.
Thank you so much.
Sophie, Healy-Thow, thank you so much. And use the opportunity to network with her. You're going to be around the whole day, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. And greetings to all the 400 volunteers, of course, coming from Berlin. So now we're diving into our panel debate, and I already saw your questions. So keep the questions going. Thank you so much. So the urgent need for transformation, and that's really the keyword of the next 30 minutes of our agri-food systems. What to do with that keyword, how to enable transformation, what to prioritize, and how to communicate. And I welcome now State Secretary Björk Sandke with here on stage, Joey Campari, global leaders at the World Wildlife Fund, and of course, Roberto Jaguaribe, the ambassador of Brazil to Germany. Join me here on stage, and I will do a quick introduction then in full length in a second. State Secretary, thank you. And we can, of course, shower them with a round of applause, right? Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Dear Björk Sandke, you've been the State Secretary for International Development at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 2021. You have a broad background in international development, particularly in the fields of global health, human rights, and aid effectiveness, and you've held positions at the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and the Church of Norway, just to mention a few. Again, welcome here on stage. Yes, and of course, again. We also have Roberto Jaguaribe Gomes de Matos. You mentioned Roberto is fine, just for the abbreviation. You're the ambassador of Brazil to Germany since February 2019. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today as well. Thank you. Mucho obrigado. And last but not least, we have Joao Campari with us. You're the global leader of World Wildlife Fund's food practice, leading the organization's efforts to enhance the sustainability of the global food systems. Your focus is sustainable agriculture and aquaculture, sustainable diets and food loss and waste. And you've been recently the chair of the UN Food Systems Summit Action Track 3 on boosting nature-positive production, among a lot of other things, but just to name a few. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Joe, I'd like to start with you because I mentioned the big keyword transformation and the call for transformation. Everybody is talking about call for action and call for change and call for transformation. It's easily written down, it's easily pointed out, but the question really is, from your perspective, how and in what regard do you think food systems need to change when you break it down? What would be a priority from your perspective?
Well, delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. Let's start with a little story that happened 2 weeks ago, where the FAO launched its landmark report. It's called The State of Food and Agriculture. And for the first time, it measured the costs of the food system, the hidden costs, those costs that nobody's paying for, right? And the hidden cost of the food system in that report is at least $10 trillion per year. And why those costs happen? It's like this incorporate social costs, it incorporates health costs, and incorporates environmental costs, right? So, and part of the environmental cost is the 80% biodiversity loss that food systems cause, right? Nobody's paying that bill. In fact, food today costs 1/3 of its true price, give or take, right? And why does that happen? Because our food system, in part, is organized around 12 plants and 5 animals that represent 75% of the global calories that are traded in the world. So all of the plants and all of the animals that we have there are more than 2,000 plants, if memory serves, that could be eaten. We are organizing our supply chains, our investments, the incentive structure around this 12 plus 5. So we could not be at a better place to talk about this problem, which is a huge problem because it leads to deforestation, it leads to demise of important habitats, it leads to 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions that come from food systems. So we really need to stimulate crop diversity. And I loved what our youth, the wise words from our youth, she said, crop diversity is the silent hero of our food system because it supports natural processes, it supports sustainable diets. So for people and planet, this is a recipe for success. Instead of giving too much attention on reducing the impacts of the current commodities on food systems, perhaps we should pay equal attention to stimulating more crop diversity, increase the range of foods that we can eat globally. This would help the planet by reducing its pressures on natural ecosystems and also diversify diets. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much. I come back to the report in a second because there's also a question from the audience in regard to that. But I'd like to continue first with the State Secretary. When we talk about transformation and to prioritize, and of course it is a national responsibility as well. So where do you see the to-dos and the homework of your country, but of course of the international community when it comes to the big words, transformation?
Exactly. No, thank you, and thanks for putting this on the agenda. I believe we are at a time now globally when we have a momentum where we can make that change that we have talked about for some time. And we've heard very clearly the backdrop, the serious backdrop to the discussions that we are having, and the need to make sure that people are food secure. Now, some of us here are wearing, the Sustainable Development Goal pin. We know that we have very few years left to reach our goals, and we know that we are far, far off track to reach several of the goals, including Goal 2 around eradication of hunger and ensuring food security. We need to try to achieve that while not destroying the planet and ensuring diversity. And to do that, we do need to transform food systems. So we agree on that. What can we do? There are a number of opportunities that we have, and on several different levels. Talking about crop diversity and bringing that discussion really to the forefront, I think is very, very important. As Norway, we are very proud to be hosting the Svalbard Seed Vault, and I think more and more people are seeing the use of making sure that we have that diversity of seed and biodiversity, not just as a museum, but as something that we can actively use to promote also climate-adapted food production. So that's one important part of it. It has struck me and others that I listen to how first the COVID pandemic, and then the results of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the impact that had on food systems and food trade, and how that really exposed the vulnerability of some of our global value chains in food, and how that leads us to have, I think, more serious discussions about local value chains and making sure that we really get that using local seed varieties, but also stimulating local value chains and local food production and local consumption of local food varieties. And I hear that discussion on the global arena now coming up much more clearly than it has before. So, well, there are a number of other important aspects of our food systems that we should make sure that let me mention two more to include. One is we mentioned biodiversity, and on the one hand, food production and agriculture, we've heard about how it can be a problem in terms of climate emissions, in terms of loss of biodiversity, but in talking about nature-based solutions, which we also hear coming up more and more strongly, I believe our farmers, who are very close to nature, and our agricultural systems can be part of that solution. And I see solutions coming out there which are very, very promising. And finally, let me also mention how if we really are to promote that local food production and that sensitivity to local environments, that we focus on local, small-scale farmers, many of whom are women. So we need to ensure that we understand the gender dimension in terms of access to knowledge, access to inputs, and access to markets. So I'll stop there. There are lots of things to talk about.
A lot of keywords again. We tackle on that in a second. Mr. Ambassador, of course, I'd like to come back to you. Brazil is among, when you look and when you Google Brazil, the most biologically diverse countries in the world. It's classified at the top among the world's 17 mega diverse countries, and second only to Indonesia in terms of species endemism. So all these biodiversity hotspots needs to be, of course, protected. And when it comes to crop diversity, what are successful pathways that you can share with us when we are on that road to transformation? What helps and what doesn't help?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This, of course, is a fundamental issue. Agriculture in Brazil is of extreme relevance. We have, for that purpose, two ministries related to agriculture, one dealing with bigger agriculture, the other dealing with agrarian development, which is family agriculture, which, of course, is a fundamental part of the social element, but also of the production element in Brazil. I think that, the world is the same. The view from above is different from the view from below. The view from below, hunger is one of the most important issues that has to be tackled. We just heard Alvaro Lario saying that there were 900 million in extreme hunger situations. The report says 735 million people hungry in 2022. And this, of course, is a fundamental issue that has to be tackled. And as I say, the view from below focuses on this and many other issues as well. I think many things are very important. Amongst those is the fact that local conditions are imperative. And it's very difficult from 10,000 miles to have the right recipe of what you should do in your own little territory. In the case of Brazil, it's not something you do in Brazil. It's not something you do in a state. It's something you do in the individual biomes. And of course, everyone has a different recipe. We are very fortunate to have witnessed in Brazil a tremendous growth in agriculture, which is essentially due to the gigantic effort that has been made in research and technology of adaptation. And this includes all modalities that can be appreciated. Crop diversity is one of the issues that the major Brazilian Agricultural Research Agency is looking into very closely. But it's very different in a country like Brazil. In spite of the gigantic food production, we have 10% of our land dedicated to agriculture. In Europe, it's usually at least 50%. In all the countries of Northern Europe, it's usually at least 50%. So the difficulties are very different, and the conditions are very different. We are increasing productivity. We have the benefit of being a tropical country, which allows for different crops in the same land. In many places, we have 3 crops. One crop, a food crop, then a forage crop, just to benefit the soil, and then an additional crop, which is the 3rd crop. And of course, this is possible in agriculture, in tropical agriculture. It's not possible in temperate agriculture. So there are many different circumstances that have to be taken into account. And in Brazil, agriculture is a boom. It is the place for young people, not old people, completely different from what you see in Europe. It's a place for women, where women are taking the leadership in agriculture together with young people. And it's one of the major places for innovation, because innovation is fundamental in agriculture as well. And I mean not just crop diversity, but digitalization, as an example. Digitalization is fundamental, or a very important element of preservation and of innovation, which is biodefensives, the development of biodefensives. Today in Brazil, more than 30% of agriculture already is using biodefensives, and this is going to continue to grow because research is very, very heavy in this direction. So all of these elements play a very central role in the development of Brazilian agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Joe, I'd like to come back to you because, of course, you mentioned the report of the FAO, State of Food and Agriculture Report 2023, and it's also something that I hear now bringing it down to the local level. Also was what Mr. Ambassador just mentioned, localized action that applies the most relevant levers to drive transformation, which is critical. But how can we do that? I mean, we are, of course, now debating again on a national level. The COP is on an international level. So how does it drip? Is it dripping down to the local level, which is also a question from you, from the audience.
Awesome.
How do we do it? Because of course it's nice to have podiums, it's nice to have stage debates, right? But at the end, it needs to finally end up on the soil.
Exactly. The global conversation on food system transformation has one particular aspect. We are too quick to celebrate and toast for commitments. Right? But sometimes these commitments are empty because they don't go anywhere. So we go from conference to global summits, to global summits, raising our glasses, toasting this, the signing of a commitment by governments and NGOs too. But we forget that unless we act on the ground and in the water, in real places, the food system will not be transformed. It doesn't get transformed through conversations. Right? We need to align the incentive structure to do what is right. And to do what is right is this one here. You know, it's crop diversity everywhere. When we talk about transformation of the food system, we tend always to take a supply side approach. We talk about agriculture, we talk about aquaculture, we talk about food production, but we forget that there is a demand side for this. I'll give you an example. 30% of the emissions from the food system is responsible for 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions. When you look at production, food loss and waste, and diets, dietary shifts hold the largest mitigation potential to reduce that 30%. When you look at production, it's between, the mitigation potential of production is between 14 and 40%. The mitigation potential of food loss and waste is up to 10%, but you cannot remove all food waste. And the potential for diets is up to 48%. So when you look at the 30%, 48% of that can be dietary responses. And what do we need to do? On the ground, what can we consumers do? We need to diversify our diets, right? If we care about the climate, if we care about biodiversity, we need to diversify our diets and to make to align incentives from policy, financial, so that the real change will happen on the ground in real places. Otherwise, we'll just be talking the talk.
Ms. State Secretary, you, of course, have a lot of conversations. You are on a lot of stages. Where is the blind spot? Who's missing on our stages when we talk about crop diversity? Who do we have to invite more in these conversations, for these conferences, to have these conversations, to get out of our bubble? Where's the blind spot?
I think the key is partnerships. and we heard about some of the blind spots from a colleague from WWF. We don't get anywhere just by celebrating our own commitments. I completely agree with you. But then again, it is important to have that global conversation to set ourselves in the right direction, make those agreements. I think the plant treaty, for example, has made a great difference. But of course, it doesn't make a difference as long as it just remains a piece of paper that we sign and then we toast. So we need those partnerships to translate the commitments into reality.
Explain partnerships?
Yes.
Because that's a question from you, the audience, the role of the private sector and big companies.
Absolutely.
Is that also a way of partnershiping?
Yes, and thank you for raising that. So I just wanted to mention that to bring in young people, that you had our speaker earlier who talked about the kind of engagement and commitment that we can have from young people, civil society, academia, multilateral organizations, those of us who represent governments, but all of us together, and particularly from where I sit working on development assistance, we see that all the combined development assistance in the world will only get us this far when we need to go this distance, roughly. I haven't measured in the millimeter very carefully, but if you look at the financing gap to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, it's in the trillions of US dollars, and all the combined development assistance in the world is not close to helping us to get there. So I see a realization in the stages and conversations that I'm in of partnering with the private sector and looking at which areas the private sector, we can partner constructively with the private sector to help us make that progress that we do need to make towards SDG 2 and other SDGs. One example is I went to the annual meeting of the African Development Bank earlier this year, where partnering with the private sector was a topic, and several investors and private sector partners were there, or potential private sector partners were there saying, we are ready to invest, and they mentioned a couple of sectors that they felt were ripe. One of them is renewable energy, important, of course, for access to energy as well as in our climate discussions. But food is another area which is possible to look at investments. And what they were saying is that we are ready to invest. What you can do is to help with de-risking. Those investments are seen as risky. What you can do as governments, can you help us with instruments to reduce some of that risk, and then we will make the investments. So we've actually just launched a couple of months ago at the UN General Assembly, together with USAID, a new facility called FASA, a first loss facility, to help small and medium scale food producers and investors in small and medium scale food producers get involved to take some of that risk and see if we can help stimulate partnerships and, again, on the supply side of food production and sustainable food production through partnership with the private sector.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, another question from the audience, which I find quite interesting, because is it really about growing more food to feed everyone? What you've also mentioned, that the population is rising, or is it more about wasting less of the food we are already growing?
Well, I think it's a very complex question. Of course, just to pitch into this issue of partnership, because I think it's a fundamental element to dealing with all the challenges that we have today in the world. Brazil is a thoroughly committed multilateral country. I think that the only path to solving the global issues is multilateral negotiation. We believe that it is extremely important to have a diverse representation. I always tell many of my friends, especially in the G7, that like-minded countries don't even understand the problem. You have to have diverse-minded countries to understand the issues and bring solutions. And we are not just a biodiverse country, the most biodiverse, by the way, in the world. We're also a very diverse cultural country and ethnic country. And we value diversity. And of course, we value crop diversity as well. And we think that this diversity is where the solutions come from, not from like-minded thought. But coming back to this, I think in the case of Brazil, there are several very important issues that deal with this question. The most important, of course, is land use. How do we allocate land use? And the fact is that in Brazil, we have the strictest legislation in the world in terms of preserving sensitive areas. As an example, any private property located in the most sensitive area, which is the Amazon, has to have 80% native vegetation cover, 80%. You can only use 20% of your property. If it is in a less sensitive area, 35%. And any land in Brazil, you must at least have 20% of your land in native vegetation coverage. This is something that would be inapplicable in all of Europe, obviously, and most of the world. But in Brazil, it is applicable. It's part of the legislation, and it's one of the core issues for maintaining the biodiversity that we are very lucky to have and to have inherited and are keen on keeping, naturally.
Thank you. Okay, back to the money question. We need to talk about money again. Easy question, how much does it cost to save crop diversity forever? Joe.
That's a great question to which I have no answer.
It's from you. And then, how much does it cost to save crop diversity forever? Because you've mentioned earlier the hidden costs, which is a huge number. You know, is there anything that you can give us as an orientation?
Well, if you can, I don't have the number for the, how much it would cost to preserve or to stimulate crop diversity. But if we could only think of ways of internalizing those hidden costs, how can we think of a food system, of a future scenario, actually, because it's not here, a future scenario in which the food system would not impose these hidden costs, or how can we minimize them? And perhaps go back to the question of food loss and food waste. While these hidden costs are happening, 40% of all the food that is produced never gets eaten. And we have approximately close to a billion people suffering from hunger and malnutrition. We have 80% of the biodiversity being lost because of the food system, and we still throw away or lose 40% of the food that is currently produced. So if we could only internalize that hidden cost somehow by aligning the incentives, by charging the right price to food. And of course, this opens a huge debate because the fact is that almost 1 billion people do not have what to eat. How can we think of enhancing the price of food?
Absolutely.
That's where we need like policies. We need safety nets, social safety nets to do what's right for the food system. So I think that the long answer is if we can internalize or help internalize this cost through policy, that would be amazing. I think it's a giant step to it.
Yes, that's actually another question from the audience about the intersection of food systems and social justice and gender equality, because if you also mentioned, of course, how important it is to keep women and gender aspects in the loop of our discussion. How can we address the intersection of food system and social justice better than we've done before?
I think it's a key question moving forward, in particular talking about that close to 1 billion people who today do not have access to adequate food and who are food insecure. I think as all the questions that we're talking about, it's complex, so it's not one solution. We need to work on many different levels, but we need to have policies in place, but we also need that local action that I think my colleague from Brazil mentioned as well, because the challenges can be slightly different in different places. But in terms of policies, we do know, again, that most of small-scale food producers are women, and that in many of the communities that we are talking about, women have more restricted access to information, more restrictions in access to things like land ownership, more restricted access to credit, more restricted access to markets, because obviously when you've produced your food, you also need to bring it somewhere to sell it if you don't consume it. So there's a set of both norms as well as policies that we can try to push and make sure that in all our countries that we scrutinize our own policies and see are we now making sure that we have a level playing field for all our food producers to be able to produce and again make that food available. And to do that, it's important for us to listen to, we have good research and knowledge about this, but also very, very strong associations in civil society that help us also really put this issue on the agenda and tell us about the specific challenges in the different contexts where we are working, and then that will help us tailor the right solutions. So we work very closely, for example, with farmers' associations and also associations of small-scale farmers that are, I think, very, very important in helping us drive that, that change. And of course, we do need the partnerships. It's another aspect, because it was interesting, the point that when we talk about these questions, we often talk about the supply side. Of course, there is a consumption side, or let's call it an access side. Now, the SDG about hunger is about access to food. And so, working with, and there can be other schemes, such as social safety nets was mentioned. We have very good experience through in humanitarian settings, but that may be interesting to look at whether cash is providing people cash so that they can buy food if that's available. Maybe that's something that could be made available in settings beyond those crisis settings. So there are things we can do, but I do think we need to look at those, both the production side, ensuring that there is equality and access to everything you need to produce food, and then on the access side, that people actually have access to the food that they need through money or through access to markets where the food is, or what we are told are the specific barriers in the different locations.
Barriers, obstacles, challenges, of course. It's a very broad question that we're trying to find answers here to. But, Mr. Ambassador, just, of course, talking about all what's needed to be done in these times of conflicts and catastrophes, that's also a question. How do global conflicts and catastrophes affect the financing of crop diversity efforts? In the end, also taking away the attention and the priority setting of our topic of today. So how do we keep on the pathway? And how is Brazil doing it?
Well, for us, the conflict essentially changed the issue of access to fertilizers. You may know that Brazil is the largest importer of fertilizer in the world. And of course, this created a major challenge. We are now trying to be able to generate more fertilizer at home from renewable sources, actually from ammonia, from green hydrogen in the Northeast. But agriculture in Brazil is permanently in a transition. Our transition now is twofold. First, we have a very clear plan, and it's very easy to know, because it's called ABC, Agricultura de Baixo Carbono, Low Carbon Agriculture, which is the intent is to extend this tremendously for all of the production in Brazil. And the other challenge is that we have close to 1.6 million square kilometers, 160 million hectares of pasture land, of which more than 100 million is totally underutilized and is the source of emission of CO2. And to better make use of this land in a sustainable way, with biodiversity, with renewed forests and other issues, is the biggest other challenge that we have in Brazil now.
Thank you. Last question, as we, of course, it's such a big topic, running out of time as always, but I'm your timekeeper, so, and I'm between you and the next coffee break, very uncomfortable. But we have to talk about the COP28 in Dubai. Joe, for the first time at a climate COP, the presidency has made food a priority. The United Arab Emirates they are preparing an Emirates Declaration on Resilient Food Systems, Sustainable Agriculture and Climate Action. What are your expectations, and what should we be aware of, or what questions are in your mind towards the COP28?
Awesome. You know, the journey towards to include food systems as a priority for a COP did not start this year. It started 3 years ago, right? So the road to COP28 started 3 years ago, and the call to action mainly from civil society to bring food systems transformation at front and center stage in a COP. And we are very, very happy the NGO, civil society community, to have, at least the environmental community, to have the opportunity now to have this idea embraced by the UAE. The main calls to action, at least from WWF, is to incorporate food systems approaches. And by food system is not only agriculture. Agriculture is hugely important, but we cannot forget food loss and waste, and we cannot forget aligning human health with planetary health through the dietary transition. So when we call for the inclusion of food systems into the nationally determined contributions, this is what we mean. Embrace the complexity of the food system. Let's make it meaningful for the NDCs of many, many countries, because countries are very, when they are reviewing their NDCs, you can usually find agricultural sector in the NDCs. Food loss and waste is not very present, and when you talk about dietary transitions, you can count in one hand the number of countries. So our main call is to include food system transitions into NDCs, not only into NDCs, but NBSAPs, the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plans as well. And the other call is to integrate the climate and biodiversity agendas. You know, there is a an immediate need for the 3 UN conventions, biodiversity, climate, and land, to bring a food systems approach and to talk the same language, to have joint strategies to embrace food systems into these conventions. Thank you.
Well, 16 days to go until COP28 in Dubai. We will look on that. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, State Secretary Björk Sanke, Ambassador Roberto Ichaguaribe, and Joao Campari. Thank you.
Thank you.